There is a dangerous idea that many people secretly believe, that ambition is always good, that the more driven you are, the more successful you will become. Push harder, dream bigger, fly higher. We celebrate people who burn with ambition. But there is an ancient story that quietly warns us about something few people are willing to admit. Ambition can destroy you, not because ambition is wrong, but because ambition without wisdom becomes self-destruction. Today we are going to explore one of the most famous myths of ancient Greece, the story of Icarus. And more importantly, we are going to understand why this ancient myth still explains something many people experience today. The strange moment when your greatest drive begins to turn against you. This myth is not about flying, it is about the psychology of ambition and the hidden principle that determines whether ambition builds your life or quietly destroys it. But to understand that principle, you need to go back thousands of years, to a prison, to a father, and to a pair of wings made of wax and feathers. Before we begin, if you're interested in exploring ancient myths and the psychological lessons they reveal about modern life, consider subscribing to the channel. The Ancient Mind explores how these timeless stories still explain the struggles many people face today. The story begins with a man named Daedalus. Daedalus was not an ordinary man. He was one of the greatest inventors in Greek mythology, a master craftsman capable of building almost anything. His mind was brilliant, creative, dangerously intelligent. But intelligence does not always lead to freedom. At one point in his life, Daedalus and his son Icarus became prisoners on the island of Crete. The king who ruled the island, Minos, refused to let them leave. The sea surrounded them. Guards watched every ship. Escape by land was impossible. They were trapped. But Daedalus understood something powerful. If you cannot escape by land, and you cannot escape by sea, then there is only one direction left: the sky. So Daedalus began building something extraordinary. Wings, not wings of metal or machinery. Wings made from feathers and wax. Piece by piece he assembled them. Feathers carefully layered together, sealed with melted wax. 2 pairs of wings, one for himself, one for his son. And before they escaped, Daedalus gave Icarus a warning, a very specific warning. Do not fly too low, because the moisture of the sea will weigh down the wings. But do not fly too high, because the heat of the sun will melt the wax. Stay in the middle, not too low, not too high. Balance, that was the rule. Then they jumped. And for the first time in human history, at least in myth, a man and his son rose into the sky. Imagine what that must have felt like. Freedom, wind rushing across your face, the ocean far below you, the island shrinking behind you. For Icarus, this was more than escape. It was exhilaration, power, possibility. He was no longer a prisoner. He was flying, and something began to happen inside him. The feeling many people experience when life suddenly opens up, when success starts arriving, when the world becomes larger. When ambition awakens. At first, Icarus followed his father's instructions. He stayed in the middle, balanced, controlled. But then the sky began to seduce him. He flew a little higher. The air felt lighter there, the sunlight brighter, the horizon wider. And slowly, carefully, the excitement grew. Higher, 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 until eventually the warning faded from his mind. And only one thought remained: go higher. That moment is the real heart of the myth, because this is the moment many people experience in modern life. Not when they fail, but when they begin to succeed, when you first start achieving something, when your discipline begins to work, when you feel momentum building. Ambition begins whispering something dangerous. More success, more recognition, more achievement, more speed, more intensity. At first, this feels like strength. But something subtle begins to change. You stop respecting limits. You stop respecting rhythm. You stop listening to warnings. And slowly, ambition turns into something else. Hubris. Hubris is an ancient Greek word that describes a very specific psychological state. It means excessive pride, the moment when someone believes they are beyond limits, beyond balance, beyond caution. And that is exactly what happened to Icarus. He kept climbing higher, closer to the sun, closer to the heat, closer to the danger his father warned him about, until finally, the wax began to melt. First, slowly, then faster. The feathers loosened, the wings weakened, and suddenly the impossible happened. Icarus fell from the sky, down into the sea below. and the same wings that gave him freedom became the reason for his destruction. The story ends there. But the meaning of the myth continues, because Icarus is not just a character. Icarus is a pattern that repeats itself again and again in human life. Ambition without balance, drive without restraint, intensity without wisdom. And in the modern world, this pattern appears everywhere. You see it in people chasing success until they burn out. You see it in entrepreneurs destroying their health while building their companies. You see it in athletes who push their bodies until they collapse. You see it in young people who tie their entire identity to achievement until failure shatters them. The problem is not ambition. Without ambition, nothing great is ever built. The problem is forgetting the warning of Daedalus. Not too low, not too high. The middle path. Balance between ambition and humility, between growth and patience, between striving and self-preservation. But modern culture rarely teaches this. Instead, it celebrates extremes. Hustle culture tells you to work harder than everyone else, sleep less, push more, grind endlessly, outwork everyone, sleep when you're dead. This philosophy sounds powerful, but it ignores a truth the ancient Greeks understood very well. Human beings are not machines. We are systems. Biological, psychological, emotional, and systems collapse when pushed beyond their limits. The tragedy of Icarus is not that he wanted to fly. The tragedy is that he lost respect for balance. And this is something many people quietly experience today. You start pursuing a dream, maybe a career, maybe success, maybe recognition. And at first it feels empowering. You push yourself. You sacrifice, you climb. But somewhere along the way, the climb becomes your identity. You cannot slow down. You cannot rest. You cannot step back, because slowing down feels like failure. So you keep climbing, higher, closer to the sun, until the wings begin to melt. Burnouts, anxiety, exhaustion, loss of direction. The same ambition that once lifted you begins pulling you downward. And suddenly you ask yourself something strange. Why does success feel like destruction? The myth of Icarus answers that question with brutal clarity. Because ambition without wisdom is unstable. It lifts you fast, but it cannot sustain you. This is why the ancient Greeks feared hubris so deeply. Not because ambition was bad, but because unbalanced ambition blinds people. It makes them ignore limits, ignore warnings, ignore reality itself. The real lesson of the myth is not, do not aim high. That is a shallow interpretation. The real lesson is much more subtle. Aim high, but respect gravity. Strive, but remain aware of your limits. Grow, but do not confuse speed with direction, because wisdom is not found at the extremes. It is found in the middle, exactly where Daedalus told his son to fly. This forgotten principle appears again and again in ancient philosophy. The Greeks called it sophrosine, self-restraint and balanced judgment. Sophrosine means self-restraint, balance. It is the ability to hold ambition and humility at the same time, to climb without losing perspective, to pursue greatness without destroying yourself. And in a world obsessed with extremes, this principle has almost disappeared. Today, people are told they must either be obsessed with success or give up entirely, work endlessly or be lazy, chase ambition or live quietly. But the ancient Greeks understood something wiser. The strongest life is not built at the extremes. It is built in balance. The middle path, the space between fear and arrogance, between hesitation and recklessness, between comfort and self-destruction. If you feel exhausted by ambition, if you feel like the pressure to succeed is slowly consuming you, if you feel like you are climbing towards something but losing yourself along the way, then maybe the myth of Icarus is not warning you to stop flying. Maybe it is reminding you how to fly properly, with awareness, with patience, with balance, not too low, not too high. Because the goal of life is not simply to reach the sun, it is to remain in the sky, to sustain your flight, to build something meaningful without burning yourself out in the process. And that is a much harder skill, but it is also a much wiser one. The myth of Icarus has survived for thousands of years because it speaks to a tension inside every ambitious person, the desire to rise and the risk of rising too fast. The question is not whether you will feel that pull. You will. The real question is whether you will remember the warning. So if this story resonated with you, if you recognize some part of yourself in the flight of Icarus, then remember this: your ambition is not the enemy. Your ambition is your wings. But wings require wisdom, and wisdom means knowing how high to fly. If you want to explore more ancient myths and the psychological lessons hidden inside them, subscribe to The Ancient Mind, because sometimes the answers to our most modern struggles were already written thousands of years ago.